Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Science of Baking. My name is Liz Myers. I'm a community librarian with Markham Public Library, and I am so excited to have the opportunity to partner and work with RCI Science. They are absolutely amazing, as I'm sure you all know. So tonight, we're delving into the science behind the perfect baked goods with our special guest, Sachin Seth, and so happy to have him here. And I mean, let me tell you, I am someone who actually once messed up angel food cake from a box, so I really need all the help that I can get. So, are you all ready to get your bake on? Well, I hope so. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Celia Dew from RCI Science.
Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you so much for having us. I'm really excited. Since the beginning of the pandemic, it's clear that most of us have spent a lot of time in our kitchens baking to help us get through. So certainly the library has seen a lot of their cookbooks have been in high demand. So we thought, why not dig into the science of baking? What makes cake cake, and how does it look the way it looks and taste the way it tastes? So welcome to the Great Pandemic Bake Off, the science of baking. Thankfully, this being virtual means that we are able to invite our special guest all the way from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Sachin Seth from the Great Canadian Baking Show Season 2. And we also have 3 other guests. Hello, Sachin. We also have 3 other guests who will follow Sachin's instructions on how to make our gingerbread cake, perfect for the fall. Thank you so much for choosing that, Sachin. Along the way, Sachin, who studied chemistry just like me, and our 3 other guests will pop in with the science of what we're doing. And we, or at least I, might also have to clarify what we're doing. So feel free to follow along and bake with us, or just watch us attempt to bake cake. I'll also be attempting a dairy-free version because of my allergies, so that might also be a little adventure on the side. Remember, you can also ask any of your questions or comments. You can submit them in the chat box or in the comments, or via Twitter at RCI Science, or you can also email information at rciscience.ca. This is just a reminder, please be polite and respectful. Moderators will be monitoring the chat box and comments, and we'll be taking actions as appropriate. So without further ado, let me introduce our bakers, the Steam sisters, Swapna and Sonia, and Frederick Kane. So when the Sonia and Swapna are not adventuring in STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and math, these twins research concussions as PhD and MD PhD students, respectively, at the University of Toronto. Together, Sonia and Swapna co-developed a national concussion strategy, consulted on provincial concussion policy, and co-delivered a TEDx talk on youth engagement and health policy. They're outreach coordinators for Let's Talk Science, hosts of science podcasts, Medicine in Motion and Raw Talk, and involved in children's television, including various TVO programs, and most recently, Shaftesbury Kids STEAM Stars. Sport, especially hockey, of course, is one of their many hobbies, but they also enjoy learning new languages, playing the violin and sitar, and cooking. We don't know when they sleep, but we're certainly glad to have them as RCI Science ambassadors. We also have Fred, who joins us from Montreal. He graduated from McGill with a bachelor's degree in food science and chemistry, and is now a product developer in high-protein foods. In addition to dabbling part-time in entrepreneurial ventures, he has worked on the development of protein bars, layers, snacks, powders, drinks, baked goods, etc. In his free time, he works on the artisanal arts of curing meats, brewing kombucha, and producing cheese. He has more recently taken an interest in educating others on food and food science in hopes of empowering consumers to make educated decisions about their food and diet. And last, but certainly not least, Sachin Seth. Sachin is a self-taught home baker and cook from Halifax, Nova Scotia. He has been experimenting in the kitchen since the age of 13 and loves to spoil his family and friends with his creations. He currently resides in Halifax, Nova Scotia with his beautiful wife. He is a dentist and educator at Dalhousie University. You may also recognize Sachin from Season 2 of the Great Canadian Baking Show. Sachin was chosen from thousands of applicants across Canada and describes his experience on the show as both life-changing and a highlight of his culinary journey so far. You can follow Sachin on Instagram at SweetToothHFX. All right, Sachin, you can take it over now.
Well, thank you for that. I feel entirely underqualified to be on this session. My friends joining me here are highly educated, so I hope they're going to be able to help me out with some of the more finer points here on our journey through through baking. You know, it's going to be really fun because baking to me is one of those amazing things where you can take pretty much 3 simple ingredients, sugar, flour, and eggs, and combine them in a multitude of different ways, and you get very different outcomes every time. So I'm really excited to be baking with everyone and actually bringing my other love, which is science, into the game here. So with that being said, I think maybe we should start talking a bit about what we're going to do today. But before we start going to the cake that we are going to be making, I want everyone who is baking with me to make sure their ovens have now been turned on to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, we want to make sure that oven is preheated. So if you haven't done that already, why don't you run to your ovens and take care of that? And then we'll come back here and we will start talking about our ingredients. So let me get my recipe so I make sure I don't say anything incorrect. But we have, you know, the basics here really. When it comes to making a cake, we need sugar, we need flour, we need butter and eggs. And then everything else that comes on top of that is sort of extra. It becomes flavor stuff. And they don't really do much, but the basic structure is from those things. So let's talk first about the butter. Okay, so let me pull my butter out here. So for this recipe, we have half a cup of butter. Now, I hope everyone had taken their butter out and let it come to room temperature. And this is sort of the key thing with baking. Most times when you're making a cake, you really want everything at room temperature. Okay, so you take it out an hour or 2 beforehand to try to make sure that it is going to be at the same temperature as everything else, so everything comes together very, very well. So this butter I've had out at room temperature for an hour. You know, you don't want to microwave this. Okay, so if something has happened and you didn't take your butter out and it's pretty cold, the only way you're going to rescue this is to really chop it up into little bits and let it sit at room temperature. Because you cut it into smaller pieces, it will come to room temperature a lot quicker. So don't microwave. That'll ruin it. Once you microwave butter and it melts, you can't cream it, which is what we're going to be doing to make this cake. And the creaming process is very important. So we have butter and we have sugar. Okay, so that's a half a cup of butter, and I have half a cup of white sugar or granulated sugar. Okay, just basic sugar. Now these two things brought together form the foundation for the magic of our cake. Okay, so when we put the butter and we get the mixer going with that and we introduce the sugar itself is filled with sharp crystals, tiny small crystals that are going to punch their way through the butter as their mixer spins around. And what that's going to do is it's actually going to aerate the butter, and you're going to create all these air pockets. But what's cool about butter is it's really nice and fatty. It's about 85% fat and 15% water, give or take. And what that's going to do is it's going to surround those air pockets with that fat and protect it, because we want that air. We want that final air pockets to end up in our cake, which is going in the oven. So it will do its magic in puffing and expanding and creating a good lift and rise to our cake. It's one of the things that causes a good rise. We'll get to the other thing a little bit later. So I think what we're going to do, if it's okay with Celia, is maybe we'll start the cake, or did you want to go through the whole thing all at once, all the different ingredients?
Whatever makes most sense to you. If we want to start baking, let's start baking.
I think, let's get going, and we can talk about things as we go. But I think butter and sugar was a great start. Is there anything else that we need to add from the Steam Sisters or from Fred?
I would just add,
everything sounds good.
Yeah, okay. I would have an additional note about sugar as an ingredient. Sometimes it can act as a preservative. So, for example, when we're thinking about bacteria through osmosis, sugar can absorb out the water from the bacterial cells, which means that they can no longer divide and grow, which is good if we don't want bacteria. But we do want to be careful because it depends on how much sugar we do have, and sugar doesn't act as a preservative for everything. For example, mold.
Right.
Good to know.
And I also forgot to mention that sugar actually is super important in providing some color as well, because as sugar cooks, it caramelizes and it turns darker in color, and that's going to impart some color as well to our final product. So I have our butter. It's going into the mixer, and now this is where the purists might say, I need to whip this butter a bit. And if it weren't completely soft and at room temperature, that might not be a bad idea. But this is really soft. Like I could stick my finger in this very easily. So I'm just going to dump my sugar in here as well. Okay, so half a cup of sugar, half a cup of butter into our mixer.
So I have to use oil because I can't have butter.
Interesting.
It's not going to cream as well, but it is fatty like butter. So it will help keep the batter moist. It'll do a little bit, just maybe not as much in the flavor department and the rising department or the structure, I guess.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point, Celia, because for those of you out there who can't have dairy or perhaps you're vegan and you don't want to have butter, there are substitutes, and oil is a great one. You can also use vegetable shortening, which it'll impart a funny texture to your final cake. But, you know, there are some recipes that call for nothing but vegetable shortening. And then there's obviously margarines, which are completely dairy-free. And those could be viable options too, because they're sort of butter-like in structure and might fluff up a bit more than oil would. But I can't wait to see what you come up with, Celia, with the oil. It's going to be very So I'm going to make some noise, everybody. I'm going to turn my mixer on. It'll take a couple of minutes. Okay, let's see if we can actually have a conversation while the mixer's going on.
So the Steam Sisters, where are you guys at this point? Are you mixing yet?
We are definitely mixing. As we get our we got to plug in that mixer. I'm going to chime in again about sugar. It's one of my favorite ingredients and has amazing sweet tea. And while I'm having a sugar, and also some sugar and adds more sweet. Actually makes things that boiling in your throat. So that's because it helps you lower the gelatinization. With that, add some flour absorbed liquid and really helps to indulge air bubbles. Lower that down, and then you have more time to run, which means
Sorry, so I think, I don't know if it was true for everyone, but it was a little bit hard to hear you with the mixer. So I guess we know that the mixer might be a little bit loud when we're trying to talk. So sorry, do you want to repeat a little bit of that, of what you were saying?
I always want to repeat myself about sugar. One of my favorite ingredients, having like really nice sweet food. So what I said was we were talking about sugar. That's another pronunciation of it, by the way. Sugar is in power and sugar is in that property of osmosis, but it also helps with giving volume in your cake. So it helps delay the gelatinization process. What is that? That's when flour starts to absorb liquids and envelops air bubbles. And so when sugar's slowing that down, it gives more time for the cake to rise before the structure sets. And I think that's pretty sweet.
That is pretty sweet. I like that intended pun there. Well, this is what mine looks like. It's kind of, I wouldn't say it's appetizing with oil, but it doesn't look that appetizing, but I think it'll be okay in the end product.
It might be okay. Now, I'm sorry I tuned out and I put myself on mute because that thing was louder than anything else. But
No
and
worries.
I knew everyone else could talk around me. But I want to show you where I'm at after about 2 minutes or so of creaming that butter.
Okay.
So it has gotten quite light and pale, and it's gained some volume. And that's how I know that I've actually done enough creaming. So it usually takes about 3 to 4 minutes of really good high-speed mixing, okay? And when you get to that stage, you know you're done. So we're going to stop there, and we did the creaming. Very important step. Do not ever skip that because we need to start the process for this rise right now, and that's beating a lot of air into that butter.
Okay.
So the next step is going to be our egg. So someone's going to talk about an egg here. Who's going to talk about eggs?
I think Fred might talk about egg a little bit.
All right.
Yep. Eggs.
Okay, there you go.
So eggs, an essential source of protein. It really has all the nutrients in it to create life. but more importantly, it has lecithin. So what lecithin is an emulsifier, and it's essentially a compound that has both water affinity and fat affinity. And what this will do is it will stabilize our butter fats with other watery ingredients such as water, which we'll add eventually. Isn't that right, Sachin?
Absolutely. It's like, you know, you guys, when you take some oil and put it on top of water, they don't like to mix. They stay separated. The last thing we want is our cake to sort of have layers of wetness and layers of fattiness. We want everything to come together and play. And egg with that lecithin, that emulsifier, is really going to help bring everything together and have the fatty things and the watery things play and get together without staying in their own corners. So it's a very important part to our cake, and it imparts some color, which, you know what, in this particular cake, it's going to get killed by the molasses, but it does in say, a white cake or a vanilla cake. The egg is really important because it gives some color and richness to your final cake. And certainly the proteins in there also help brown the cake or the baked good as well. And so that's sort of a nice step too. But we're going to carry on with our air generation in beating this egg into the creamed butter and sugar, again, very well. We want to make sure we get as much air into this and get it very homogeneous. And as Fred was saying, you because the egg has that emulsifier, you shouldn't see any hopefully large globules of fat separated from the egg. It should become nice and smooth and creamy. So I'm going to do that right now.
All right.
Again, sorry for the noise.
Yeah, I opted to mute myself.
That makes sense. Now, oh, there you go. Yeah, I think that's a really good point with lecithin. I see that actually a lot when I look at food labels, and I look at food labels a lot just to make sure that there's no dairy in the ingredients. And lecithin is definitely a very common ingredient, especially soy lecithin. And people get concerned because I'm also allergic to soy sometimes, and so they're like, "Is soy lecithin okay?" Usually fine.
So far, so good.
Yeah, awesome. Are you guys also mixing in the eggs at this point?
I'm still waiting on the butter to cream.
All right, I'm back from making noise. So another thing I forgot to mention to everyone is, you know, it's really important that you clean your beater down every time. Now, if you're using a hand mixer, you might not find it gets gunked up so much, but in these stand mixers, the attachment can get pretty gummed up, and you really want to make sure you're cleaning everything off of it, because you want to make sure that everything gets mixed in as fully as possible. You know, at the end of the day, baking is just a chemistry experiment. And if you don't have all the chemicals that you need in the right quantities, your experiment's not going to work out very well. So we have to make sure we clean everything down. Now,
we do have a question, sorry, about mixing. Since, you know, part of it is also equipment settings. We have a question about how fast should the mixer be? What should be the setting on that mixer to cream?
That's a good question. So I run my mixer usually at a medium speed for this. Now, you might want to start it off a bit slower, because what's going to happen is when the egg hits that butter, it's not going to want to mix, and it's going to be slopping everywhere. And it'll fly out at you if things are going too high. So start slow until it starts to incorporate into the creamed butter. And then as it gets, just drive the speed up a bit by bit. And then you want to get it to medium high, so you can get some really good motion on your beater attachment and incorporate some good air. So that's a good question. So here is what things look like now. I mean, they're not going to look super appetizing, but here's what they look like when you have put your egg in. And it's, maybe you can't see very well there, but everything is come together, and it's creamy and fluffy and light. And that's really what we're going for.
So my oil is sort of a little bit less solid. It's a little bit more liquidy here, but.
You know, and that's okay. That's okay.
We'll find out.
Totally. So you know what, everyone? Now we're going to just take a break from this. I'm going to put this aside. We'll come back to that. Now let's talk about our dry ingredients. So We have flour. That's important stuff here. And I know there's a lot of people out there these days who want to go gluten-free or they're gluten sensitive and need to make substitutes for this. But I'll tell you, when it comes to baking, we can try our best to substitute the flour, but there are some really important proteins present in this stuff right here that is hard to mimic in other non-wheat based things. It gets close, don't get me wrong, but I think it's always, in my personal opinion, at a trade-off for texture. But I think someone's going to talk to us about flour, so now might be a good opportunity.
Before we do that, though, we do have a couple of questions. What if someone doesn't have a stand or hand mixer?
Well, if someone doesn't have a stand or hand mixer, it is, listen, we've been baking since probably the 17, 16, 1500s, probably back to AD. We've been or BC, we've been baking, and you use your hands. Now it's gonna hurt. It's gonna be a lot of hand mixing, but you could use a wooden spoon or a spatula and really mix that butter into the sugar. You're not gonna get, unfortunately, as good a amount of air incorporated unless you're super strong and just mixing like the blazes out of it. But it's going to be hard to do without, but it's not impossible. And I wouldn't say, oh, I'm sorry, you can't bake today because you don't have a mixer. I say try your best. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And then someone asked if they could use stevia instead of sugar or as a substitute.
Good question. Yeah, stevia has come out with one-to-one sugar substitutes. And if you're used to eating stevia and don't mind the taste in your baked good, you absolutely can. You can absolutely use that. There are other ones on the market that are even better, like Swerve, which actually might be all stevia, but it might be a mixture of erythritol and stevia, whatever stevia is. Yeah. So that might be a bit better. But again, whatever you're comfortable eating, you could substitute it. I think Swerve, which is the brand name, and I hate using brand names, but I think it's a one-to-one substitute, and that's really important because you really don't want to play too much with the amount of sugar that's present. And at the end of the day, without real sugar, you don't end up getting the same sort of brown or texture to your baked good. But if you can't eat sugar, you can't eat sugar, and it's just gotta do what you gotta do.
Yep. That's what I'm
on that note, if I may interject, it's actually a high intensity sweetener. So what is done in the industry often is we need to replace that mass of sugar that was replaced because you need so little of it to sweeten something so much. Oftentimes we need to replace it with other carbohydrates. Yep. Fun fact.
That's good to know. That's very good to know. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Fred. That's awesome.
So often it will be replaced by fiber.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's how you keep your label.
Right. And fiber, and some of these sugars are already sugar alcohols, right?
Yes, that is correct. Like erythritol that you mentioned.
People should be careful when you eat these sugar substitutes because between the fiber and the sugar alcohol, it can really do a job on your stomach if you have high quantities of it. So that's also something to keep in mind as well.
Actually, that's an interesting point. As a dentist, do the different types of sugar, I don't know if this is a silly question, but do the different types of sugar affect your teeth differently, or they just sort of do the same thing?
That's a really good question, actually. Of course, white sugar, whether it's brown or white or whatever, that sugar is bad for your teeth, obviously, as are any natural sweeteners, honey, agave, cane syrup, any of those things are bad. Now, when we move over to the sugar alcohols like erythritol, mannitol, sorbitol, all those sweeteners, they aren't as bad on your teeth. They actually don't really result in any major acid production in your mouth. But there's actually one sugar that we really like in dentistry, and that's xylitol. And xylitol is a sugar alcohol that is actually found to prevent the bacteria in your mouth from metabolizing sugars, and it blocks the pathway by which they metabolize sugar. So there's an even lower acid production after eating. Because at the end of the day, for those of you who don't know, a cavity is just your the bacteria in your mouth having a huge party with all the sugar and carbohydrates that you've eaten. And when they have the party, they eat it and they spit out acid. And the acid is what attacks your teeth. So if you block the carbohydrate or the sugar, then the bacteria don't have a party and can't produce acids. And so xylitol is really cool in that it actually gets eaten up by the bacteria because they're pigs, and it blocks their metabolism. It's a metabolic blocker. And so that way, any sugar that comes around after it, they can't eat. They can't metabolize it. And so we actually give xylitol. It's in chewing gums, and you can get it in some toothpaste. And it's given for people who have a really high cavity rate. And it helps as part of their regime to lower the number of cavities they have. So that's
wow.
Good question.
I'm glad I asked it. Yeah, that's really good to know. And I think for anybody who's like wondering how do you know if it's a sugar, alcohol, it ends with an OL. That's how we tell that it's related to alcohol in some way.
Yeah.
And knowing that about xylitol is such a pro tip for any person with a sweet tooth. So
oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah. And of course, brushing your teeth. That's the easiest one. Make sure you brush your teeth and you floss. I can't say that enough. And I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to say that. Brush your teeth twice a day. Thank you. So we can come back to talking about this stuff too while we talk about measuring flour. That's really important because flour is a funny thing. It really likes to pack itself together, and that will affect the amount of flour that you use, which is another point I want to make is when I bake, I try to use recipes that go by weight. And that's just the chemist in me coming out because quantities are so important and being exact is so important when it comes to baking. And when you use these measuring cups, they're great for the most part, but you can get different amounts of flour into this measuring cup depending on how I actually pack it. And so if I were to really use the flour and pack it into this and weigh it, I would really have a high weight of flour, more than I need. So when you don't have a scale or the recipe isn't written in a weights, then make sure you do this. When you have your flour, you want to fluff it up a bit in its container or whatever you're doing, and then spoon it into your measuring container. So this is my 1 cup. Now I should say we need 2.5 cups of flour here. So I've pre-measured most of it here, but I wanted to save 1 cup for you. I'm going to overfill, okay? And then I'm going to use something flat or a knife or something and just level off the surface. And I am not going to push down on that. I'm just going to leave it like that. And then that is how you want to weigh and measure flour, okay? It's important because I see so many people getting in there and really ramming the flour into the cup because they want to pack it. And there's actually very few things in baking that you want to pack down. Brown sugar is one of them. Flours are not, okay? So make sure that you always measure out your flour like that. So here I have 2.5 cups of flour. And as we've mentioned, flour is really important because it has some protein in it. And these protein, as you work the flour, develop, and it's called gluten, is one of the proteins, and it will create some structure around all those air pockets. And as you bake it, and the gluten itself becomes less and less flexible because of the heat and the baking, it forms itself around that air pocket and puffs up and holds itself. And that's how your cake gets all those nice little airy voids in it, and you get some rise. So it's really great that we have gluten, but it's a double-edged sword. Because we have gluten, we can overactivate it. And when you overactivate it, it gets so tough, it can't expand with the air pockets that have been worked into the butter and eggs there, and it locks down. You get a really dense, chewy, not very pleasant cake. So
that makes sense.
I think we have some maybe more information on gluten.
Yeah. Well, we know that there are different kinds of flour, and there's some like different amounts of proteins in those different flours. So that's why you get like cake flours or bread flour and all-purpose flour. We're using all-purpose flour today, and that actually leads to someone else's question: is there a difference in the flours that are used? For example, Red Rose, Robin Hood, Bulk Barn.
That's a really good question. I would say, without really knowing, that if they're all-purpose, then they have to be called that. They have to conform to a certain gluten and the protein level needs to be of a certain level. Now, when you talk about cake flour, that's a low protein flour. And then you have bread flour, and that's a high protein flour. So it changes the amount of protein depending on the name of the flour. But if you buy all-purpose flour, Robin Hood, Red Rose, Bulk Barn, no name, whatever, if it's called all-purpose, it should generally work.
Fred, do you have anything to add to that since you work in the industry?
Oh, that pretty much summarizes it. As Sachin said, yeah, the protein content is really what's going to dictate what the difference between the flours are, as he said. Bread flour generally has more protein, i.e. gluten. And if we come back to the topic of our baked goods today, that's the importance of adding butters and other fats to our mixture, because those will limit the interaction of our protein, which is glutenin and gliadin. It will limit the interaction with water, and that in turns will allow it to soften the cake. So the gluten network won't develop just as much.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if this were bread we were making, it will be a whole different story. We want gluten. We want to develop it. We want to knead and pull and really activate that gluten. But as Fred said, when we're making cake, the last thing we want is a dense, chewy cake. It's not what you want, right?
Right.
So,
and so we have another question about unbleached flour.
Yeah. Fred might want to take that one.
Yeah, Fred.
Unbleached flour, the bleaching on the flour is really just an alkaline treatment to remove any colors that might seem undesirable. So you really are just removing colors and probably taking some nutrients out in the same process.
Yeah. And I think people who are maybe want to eat organic or healthier in that capacity, they maybe lean towards unbleached flours because it's one less step of processing. And all you're going to find is the color of your baked good might change a bit. Okay, because it's not white, and you're making, say, a very white vanilla cake or an angel food cake, it's not going to be as brilliant white. It tends to change. And I find, having used unbleached flour a few times, things brown a bit differently, and it very well has to do maybe with the actual processing of the flour, or lack thereof.
Right.
So
it's really just a cosmetic choice then, and if you want your good to be really brilliant, okay, got it.
Aesthetics, it's important. Aesthetics.
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
To this, and we can certainly take more questions. I'm going to add our salt. Sorry, so that is a half a teaspoon of salt. Now, listen, those of you who are baking maybe for the first time or not experts, you can never leave salt out of baked goods. Salt is so important to flavor, okay? So from a person who knows tongues really well, because I'm a dentist, there's all these taste buds on your tongue. And good food will stimulate a lot of those different taste buds, not just one. So we have sweet, we have sour, we have bitter, we have salty. And something that's really tasty, it actually hits on a lot of those different taste buds. And so when it comes to baked goods that generally tend to be sweet, you want to provide some balance so it's not cloying and it really just kills the item because it's so sweet. The salt provides that balance. But I also think it does some other things that my friends are going to tell us about.
Yeah, I think there was a few studies that showed that salt actually enhanced the sweetness flavor. Better than without salt. Yeah, Fred.
That would be correct.
That would be correct. Okay, good.
That would be correct.
And certainly I know that if you're making a chocolate cake, you almost amp up the salt a little bit higher than you would, say, a vanilla cake, because the chocolate and the salt, it really brings out the chocolatiness as well. It's very important. So it's a definite flavor enhancer for sure.
And similar to that, salt is also a coffee flavor enhancer.
Oh,
if you want to add a little bit of salt to your coffee, it will taste more like coffee.
That's really cool.
I am going to try that tomorrow morning for sure.
Please do.
It's amazing what your tongue can pick up on. And if you get certain taste buds going and then other ones and they start to feed off of each other, it really enhances flavors. I mean, if you've ever had bland food, and a little bit of salt on it, it just wakes up. It becomes a whole different thing. So salt's important. So please don't leave that out. And it's a pretty small amount of salt. So those of you who are watching your sodium intake, I totally get it. It's not going to hurt you. A half a teaspoon really is a very small amount. So to that, we have added the salt, and now I'm going to add my spices. And so this is important. Now, if you left these out, and I'm going to talk about what this is, but if you left your spices out, your cake is still going to work because they're not bringing anything to the game in terms of structure, but they're bringing what we want, because who cares about structure really? What you're bringing is you're bringing flavor. And so what I added to this is cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of ground ginger, and a 1/4 teaspoon of cloves. Okay, so those are really important. Now, cloves, I've actually cut back on the cloves. Initially, when I used to make this cake, I had about 1/2 teaspoon in it. And cloves can be quite challenging for some people. It's very strong flavor. And so I think cutting back a bit, it's a bit more pleasant. It can almost be medicinal. An interesting fact about cloves from a dental perspective, it's actually, it's a homeopathic remedy for toothaches. And back in the day, people would take a clove and put it by the tooth that was hurting them, and it does in fact provide some relief of pain. So much so that even modern day dentistry, we still have filling materials that use eugenol, which is clove oil. And it's part of the filling material that gets put into a tooth that's giving you some problem. So it's pretty cool stuff.
That's
Wow.
really cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. And if someone would want to use cloves at home, is there a way that we should be doing that, or should we avoid making our own concoction?
If you want to use cloves for baking,
Or if for the toothache?
well, I think if you're having a toothache, you should probably go see your dentist.
Fair.
It's very homeopathic, and I'm sure if you took a clove and just put it by your tooth, it might work. I can't say I've tried it, and it's pretty old school thing, but
Right.
but you know, I should look up that. That's a good question.
So maybe we won't recommend that. Go see
I
a
would
dentist
not recommend it.
instead.
It's a story about where it came from, guys, but you need to make sure you go see your dentist if you have tooth pain. So I'll leave that at that. And then the last dry good, we're going to take a pause on. Unless anyone have anything to say about the spices that I might have missed.
We have a quick question about spices. So we have ground ginger and we have ground cinnamon, but we don't have ground cloves. So we stuck some cloves in this mortar and pestle. Is that going to, any tips for us figuring out how we should I just go ham? I guess.
Go ahead.
So just to make sure I heard you okay. So you have cloves in a mortar and pestle. Is that what you said?
Yeah, because we don't have ground cloves.
Yeah,
We just have
go to
cloves.
town, build those muscles, and really grind that as fine as you can, and that'll be just fine, totally. And you might probably use 5 cloves, maybe.
We overdid that, but that's just fine.
Sorry, we do also have another question about the difference between sea salt and pink salt.
Oh, well.
Ooh, I could answer that.
Go ahead, Fred.
All right. So the difference between sea salt and pink salt would be the source and the mineral content. So what the pink hue you see in pink salt is actually nitrite, and that is the same compound that we use to cure meats, which gives it a nice pink flavor. That thing is absent in sea salt, and sea salt comes obviously from the sea. And you'd expect other substances like magnesium chloride inside of it, whereas that would probably be absent in lower quantity in pink salt.
Okay.
Yep. So it's all the other minerals that are inside of the salt that makes
Right.
it the
It's
difference.
not the actual salt itself necessarily.
No, salt is salt. Sodium chloride.
Sodium chloride, our good old friend.
That is correct.
And then we had a question about using coconut oil. So that's actually really interesting because that's what I'm going to use, or coconut milk is what I'm going to use later. But if you have an oil that hardens in the fridge like coconut oil, can that be creamed like butter? I don't know.
Yeah, it can be actually. And I have made loaves before out of coconut oil, and it works pretty well. It does. Its melting point is very different. So
Yes.
Coconut oil can melt a bit quicker than butter does, but it seemed to work just fine. And there are a lot of recipes out there that do call for coconut oil versus butter. So yeah, it'll work great. Yeah.
And I think it's also, if you don't mind having a little bit of coconut flavor. I don't know how much it comes through, but I find that it can be quite strong. compared to other alternatives.
That's a really good point. It's funny. I like eating a lot, and for some reason, I have a block with coconut. I can't really taste it, and so I'll make, say, a banana bread with coconut oil, and I can't taste the coconut. People are like, oh my God, this is so strong with coconut. I'm like, I cannot taste it. If I make coconut frosting, I just cannot taste it. I keep on adding more flavoring just to bring it up. But anyways, yeah, I think
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder why if it's common that people have a coconut flavor block. That's really interesting.
I something to look into as well. So
for sure.
So ginger, cloves, cinnamon in there, and now we have baking soda. So I'm going to dump this in here, and that is going to be 1.5 teaspoons. But this is where we're going to take a little pause, and we're going to talk baking soda. So in your kitchen, you likely have baking soda, and you probably have something called baking powder. They are not interchangeable. They are not. You cannot just take one and substitute for the other. They work very differently. Baking soda is about 3 to 4 times stronger than baking powder. Baking powder does in fact have baking soda or sodium bicarbonate in it, but it also has other things, cornstarch and some other fillers that aren't going to react the same way when it comes to the rise. Now, what's interesting about baking powder is that it's actually a double acting. So you get an initial rise when you have that acid-base reaction that we're going to talk about in a second. And then when it goes in the oven and it gets heat, that's a second rise that happens with it. So it activates even further. So I'm not saying one is better than the other. It's just really important to follow the recipe because it's been developed to properly react with the acids that are present in your food. And so acid is where we're going to be pausing now. So baking soda, as I said, it's called sodium bicarbonate. This stuff right here is very interesting. So if we were to add it to water, let's just take a spoon here and put it in water. Sort of boring, right? Not getting much of anything there. I'll stir it. Okay, so it got cloudy on me. That's great. Boring. But let's try this next glass over. Let's move this out of the way. Now this is vinegar. And for those of you who don't know, vinegar is a pretty strong acid. Okay, it's called acetic acid. And it likes to react with something like baking soda, which is a base. And so when we do put that in there, you end up getting all this fizzing and foaming. And what that is carbon dioxide gas getting created. And it is all bubbling up and leaving behind water, which is fine, but what we're getting is those bubbles. And that is what's going to help us get some rise in our cake. So that's the basics there, but this recipe gets a bit complicated because we don't really have, on first sight of reading this, any acid. I don't have lemon juice. I don't have vinegar. But what we do have is molasses. And molasses, for those of you who probably tried it, it's very strong, pungent, sweet, sugary stuff. Okay? You can't substitute molasses for honey in this recipe. You can't use corn syrup. You have to use molasses. Why? Because I'm going to show you right now. So when we have molasses, and I have 2 little blobs of molasses here. This one over here, I'm not going to touch, but the one beside it, I'm going to take some baking soda and sprinkle it on and mix it in. Now, you're not going to notice much going on right away, but we give it just 20 seconds or so here, and you're going to start to notice it lightening up in color. Now, I don't know if the camera's going to be able to pick this up, but it's starting to react there. You can see that it's getting lighter. Now, up close, it's really changing color and it's sort of getting frothy a bit and it's changing its texture. I think you can really see that now. There's a change there, and that is the acid in the actual molasses reacting with the baking soda. So you can see it's forming a little bubble there. Molasses actually has an acidic pH. It's about 5.6, which for most of you doesn't mean anything, but 7 is neutral. Okay, we have a pH scale. It's a fancy scale. 7 is neutral. That's water. Okay, sugar, white sugar, it's pretty neutral. But this right here is acidic, and this is what's going to cause the reaction in our baked good that will cause some leavening. So now you can see really after a couple minutes how really frothy it's gotten there. It's completely changed its character with that baking soda.
Yeah, and if anyone remembers anything from high school chemistry, that's like 2 signs of a chemical change or a chemical reaction, right? Color change and bubbling.
That's right. That's right. So baking soda, we need that, and that's going inside here. So now we have our dry goods here. You want to take a whisk or a fork, whatever you have, and mix this all around. So now if you've noticed here, we've kept the dry goods separate from the butter wet goods, okay? And we're doing that on purpose because I don't want to cause this reaction to start until I'm ready to have it start. And I'm not ready yet, okay? So we're in control here, not the acid-base reaction. So I'm gonna give this a little whisk just to mix everything all together. All right, and we can put this aside.
Okay.
So
I'm just going to chime in here to say we were wondering earlier when we're putting our ingredients together because we didn't have molasses. So we were looking at what we could potentially use as a replacement. We found some websites that were saying honey, half brown sugar. And we weren't so sure because we knew the chemical properties weren't exactly the same. And I'm so glad we did get molasses because you don't just need baking soda for that reaction. You need that acid too. So
yeah. So I mean, yes, molasses certainly bringing to the game the chemical reaction, but the flavor is really important here for this gingerbread cake because without the molasses, you're going to be missing a really key flavor part. And molasses, if you've never tried it, it's a very unique taste. I don't even know how to describe it. I'd like to say it's a bit sulfury, but that makes it sound bad. It just has a really earthy sweetness to it. It's very unique and interesting. So if you've never made or touched molasses, this is a great opportunity to actually try it. So I'm glad you guys got molasses because this would not have worked out the same.
So there is really no substitute for molasses. I will say I've never bought molasses before, and it took me a while to find it. Even the grocer did not know where the molasses was.
It's actually weird. It's in the maple syrup section, isn't it?
I honestly I was just happy that I got it.
Yeah, it's a weird one to find, but I'm glad you got it because that's important. Now,
someone did ask though if they could add acid to honey.
No, you can't. You can't. It's just you're not going to know how much acid to add. And again, this is a chemical reaction, and everything is in certain quantities to react properly. And so it's just not going to work. I wish I could tell you.
For sure, but if anything, that Sachin's test was really interesting because I couldn't get molasses and I got organic date syrup, did the test, and it changed color, became white and bubbly. So that tells me I could probably use this as a substitute. Okay, date syrup. And I know that there are still a few more questions about alternatives to molasses and if lemon juice would work. I think, chemically, would lemon juice work with baking soda? If so, how much?
It would work. And again, it would come down to the acidity of the lemon juice and the basicity of the baking soda. It would be a big thing. It would be a big event that the Steam Sisters would have to do a PhD on. It would be a cool thing.
Yeah, if anything, it can be your experiment for tonight, whoever needs to use lemon juice and honey, and then let us know, tag us in a photo and show us how it turned out and how it tastes too. Because I wonder how it will affect the taste. Is there anything, Fred or Steam Sisters, you want to add about baking soda before we move on?
Just that I'll consider changing my topic for the PhD.
That's great.
Actually, we also didn't mention that baking soda is important in the coloring of the final baked good as well. Now, again, we're really killing the color here because the molasses is so strongly colored, but the baking soda will impart a darkening or a browning of the actual crust on baked goods. So it's important. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So let's go back to our butter sugar mixture and let's talk molasses now. So we told you all about molasses and what it looks like. The hard part about this is measuring it out can be awful. So I'm going to show you a little trick. Take your measuring cup. This is a liquid measuring cup, and spray it with non-stick cooking spray.
Oh. Oh, so we're using the 1 cup of molasses, was it?
1 cup of molasses. Now, for those of you who are like, well, that's great. I don't have cooking spray. Don't worry. Oil. Just take oil, really get it all inside the measuring cup. And then you can measure out your molasses. And you're going to see what's really awesome here is it'll just pour right out.
Oh.
You got the coolest tricks, Sachin.
Here we go. Watch this.
We have a question about if they don't have cups to measure out, is there a weight of molasses they could use instead? Or would they have to Google that maybe?
They would have to Google that. And, you know, had I known that 10 seconds ago, I would have weighed this. And
oh, no, I'm so sorry. I wasn't fast enough. I apologize.
No, okay. Yeah, you would have to Google that. And so you see by spraying it, it just took a swipe for me to get that all out of there. It didn't stick like it would have had I not sprayed it. So that's a good little trick there for you guys. All right. So I have molasses in there. And the one last thing, I have vanilla. It's a half a teaspoon. You know, you could probably leave this out. But for me, I always add vanilla. I always add vanilla to my baked goods because it's just that little. Vanilla. Yeah, exactly. It's a little hint of flavor. And for those of you who don't know, vanilla was very, very expensive the last couple of years because vanilla actually comes from an orchid. It's from a flower, and it's from the center part of the flower. They pick the vanilla bean and dry it. And from that, they create the vanilla extract. And there was, I think, worldwide, a huge problem with the vanilla plants, and the crops were not as fruitful or got destroyed. And it caused vanilla to go up in price, I mean, astronomically. Like a bottle of vanilla that would cost me $15 became $40. So it's really crazy. But anyways, long story short, we use vanilla. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to whip this up to incorporate that molasses and vanilla into the butter.
Okay. Now, we had a question about Blackstrap versus Fancy Molasses.
Maybe Fred can answer that one. I'm going to mute Nick.
Blackstrap? I've never heard of that.
Okay. Well, so what is Fancy Molasses? Is there like a difference between like regular molasses and Fancy Molasses? Like mine says cooking molasses.
I think that's just a marketing thing at this point because no, honestly though, molasses and molasses, it's the juice from the sugar cane that's been reduced until the water has evaporated enough where it becomes thick. And one of the interesting things about molasses is that one of the reactions that will happen, that will occur in our baking process, is caramelization, which gives it the brown color. But molasses is going to be the same molasses anywhere.
Right.
Safe to say, it is just sugar syrup.
And I know that you had a little bit more information about molasses and sweetness and stuff like that. Do you want to add that in?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So molasses is a syrup that's comprised of just water and sugar, and it has a high Brix. And what I mean by a high Brix is that there's a lot of sugar with proportion to water. So when we look at syrups in the industry, we're looking something that would be roughly 60 Brix. And what I mean by 60 Brix is that there's 60 grams of water per 100 ml of solution. So 60 grams of water for 40 grams of water.
Oh, 60 grams of sugar?
60 grams of sugar for 40 grams of water. Awesome. For a total of 100 grams. And that makes this really viscous substance. Yeah.
Amazing.
And the more concentrated, of course, the sweeter it is.
Makes sense.
Yes.
Sorry, Sachin, did you?
I just want to show everyone where we're at here. So this is what this will look like when you have mixed in the molasses and the butter and the egg, everything in here, it should be smooth and pretty homogeneous, meaning you're not seeing any large lumps of anything. Don't panic if you see a little bit of a curdling going on there. That's just the butter really just sitting in its fat globule. Don't worry, okay? As long as it's not huge chunks of that, you have nothing to worry about.
Mine's definitely bubbling up a little bit. Mine looks very dark, and I think that might be because oil doesn't have a super strong, like, light color. It's just sort of
exactly what it is, Celia. So because you didn't have that white base generated from the butter and the sugar, it's just you're getting really true color of molasses coming through.
Yes, definitely. So, the color didn't change too much.
So
gotta use that bleach. Gotta use that bleach.
Exactly. Use that bleach flour.
So to this now, this wet mixture, we're going to add our dry mixture, but not quite yet, because when we do this, this is when the clock starts ticking. Because remember that chemical reaction, it's going to start. And so you don't want to add your dry ingredients to your wet and then walk away and take a phone call and spend 30 minutes doing something else, because your chemical reaction does not pause. It just goes. And so we want to make sure that we're ready to go when we do that. And so one thing that we did not talk about doing is our pan preparation. So I have my baking pan here. It's a 9x9 baking pan. If you don't have 9x9, you have 8x8, that's fine. It doesn't really matter, except your cake's gonna be a bit thicker. You wanna prepare this by, for me, I just take a little non-cooked spray and run it around the edge. And then I have a piece of parchment paper that I will put in just to cover the bottom of my pan, so I can ensure I can get this out after it's baked. Now, if you don't have parchment paper, the nonstick spray, I would throw some flour on there and shake it around and then dust it out. And that'll provide a little bit of a protection layer between the pan and the cake, and it will release itself, hopefully. Now, you might still have it get stuck, and that's it's just the way it goes, but yes, this is, how I prepare my pan. So we got that ready. I'm going to put that aside, and now we're going to add our flour mixture into this sugary goodness all at once. And I'm going to take this sugar mixture and I'm going to mix it on low. If you mix this on high, it's going to be all over you. Low speed, and this is important now. You want to mix it just until you stop seeing streaks of flour. Okay, this is where we don't want to overmix, because we are going to develop a bit of gluten if we continue to mix it. And we want to keep the gluten development as low as possible. Okay, so I'm going to go back over here and mix this.
We're doing wet into dry, is that right?
That is correct.
That's correct.
Okay. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm definitely making a mess here.
I almost made a mess.
All right, so here's what we got now. Let's take a look at this.
Oh,
so
wow.
It is all mixed into there. It's just mixed. If I look close, I might see some darker streaks, but I literally had it on there for less than a minute. I don't want to overmix this.
Okay.
We're nearing the end, so now we're going to move a bit quicker here. I'm going to get the hottest water I can from the tap. Okay, you don't have to boil this, but just get a cup of hot water, and we're going to add it to this with your mixer running, or with you stirring if you're doing this by hand. Get someone to hold a bowl for you, and you're going to slowly add it. But when I mean slowly, I actually mean over no longer than a minute. Maybe 30 seconds at most, okay? Get the water in there and get it into that batter. So let's do that now.
So this whole time, we're definitely amateur bakers, even though we both made a pie this Thanksgiving weekend. So that was fun and good preparation for this. But this whole time, I'm just trying to not end up like that meme, the bake-off meme. Started off well, had a nervous breakdown.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely running a little bit behind. I'm still mixing in my dry and wet, but hopefully.
I might have prematurely mixed dry and wet, but we didn't do that with the molasses in the baking soda.
Okay, so.
Sorry, everybody. I'm just getting some hot water from my tap, and it's not cooperating. So
No worries. We're just catching up.
Good. Please take your time.
Actually, someone had a question about vanilla. Can vanilla paste be substituted for liquid vanilla?
Absolutely. Vanilla paste, that's some fanciness you got going on there. Vanilla paste is excellent. It's really good. It is slightly sweetened. That's nothing to worry about because the amount that you're going to use, and you can use the exact same amount. So half a teaspoon of vanilla paste will be just fine. So yeah, please do it. Okay, so I am going to add my water to this. Just slowly drizzle it in as the mixer's going, just so it doesn't all go in at once. Then you really have to work out globs of this stuff. So I'll be back in a second.
I'm just gonna.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm
just getting my water.
Awesome. Speaking of the water, one of the things that's important about that, as we spoke of earlier, water helps actually form that gluten and creating those strong bonds. And thinking about this, actually the fat, as Fred mentioned earlier, does not do that, so it hinders that process. And a fun fact is that shortening, which isn't a fat, is called shortening because it actually shortens the strands of gluten.
Oh, no way.
So we're a little bit behind, but we're going to be adding our water soon.
Okay.
All right, so I'm just going to clean up this beater. I worked in that hot water and again did it fairly quickly. And really, you want to make sure that there's no lumps of the thicker batter present in here. So after I get it off the mixer, I'm going to just sort through it and make sure that there's nothing in there that I don't want. And now, if you let this sit, which we don't want to do, you're going to notice it getting lighter and fluffier and fluffier. It's because the acid-base reaction has started. So because of that, we're going to get it into our prepared pan right away.
I can see that my batter is actually getting lighter. So I think that's a good sign.
Excellent. I can't wait to see it.
Just finishing up with my water at this point. Fred, where are you at this point?
I was afraid I'd made soup out of my batter, but I'm reassured to see that it's not too bad right now.
Oh, good. Yeah, I was a little concerned about how mine was looking. I opted not to use my very old janky mixer that I'm not really sure if I can control well enough. I don't think it has many settings. I believe it's just like 2.
So how are we doing there?
This is how mine was looking. A little bit, it's not quite incorporated yet, so I'm just going to do a little bit extra mixing.
I'm pretty good, I think.
Yeah, it looks pretty good, Fred. Yes. Yes.
Oh, wow. Nice.
That was great.
It's looking a little bit like chocolate mousse, but it's getting better
Wait,
with water.
Did you say it tasted like chocolate mousse?
It looks like chocolate mousse, yes. It certainly does not taste like chocolate mousse. And, you know, I got to say, for those of you who aren't really familiar or used to molasses, you can get quite a strong smell from this cake. But I promise you, it does tone down significantly when you actually bake it. You're not going to get really strong molassesy smell. So once you get it in your pan, it's really important to get into the oven as soon as you can. So remember, the oven was set at 350, and you're going to put it in there. Now, it's going to take, depending on your oven, anywhere between 45 and 50 minutes to bake, okay? Mine got done pretty well at 45 minutes. How do you check when it's done? Because unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be here to actually finish that up. Take a toothpick or a skewer and put it into the middle of your cake, not the edge, the middle. And if it pulls out with no gunky cake stuck to it, you know it's done. But I can guarantee you it's going to take at least 45 minutes for this to get finished. You probably will be able to take it out then if you don't have a skewer, but it's always good to check your cakes. So let's get this in the oven here.
Okay.
So we were talking earlier about substitutions, and if you have, for example, celiac disease and you can't have gluten, some potential substitutions that you could use are oat flour or sorghum flour or even brown rice flour, which has an increased starch content and elasticity. But for that, you're going to want to decrease the baking temperature by around 25 degrees and increase your baking time.
That is excellent information, actually. You know, I don't go much into gluten-free baking, thankfully, because I don't have to. But if I did, I would certainly become much more of a master at it. But the gluten-free baking that I have done, I've gotten the 1-to-1 flour substitute. And so I don't know a lot about that. Maybe you guys can tell us about that. That's a mixture of things, isn't it?
So you were mentioning 1-to-1 substitute of the alternative flour?
Yeah, it's like a you can buy it in the grocery store and it just says 1-to-1 substitute, meaning whatever flour was called for in your recipe, you can just use the same amount of flour or gluten-free flour for it. And it's a mixture of different things. It probably has a lot of the different flour substitutes that you were referring to, along with, I think, xanthan gum is in there as a thickener, and there's all these other things that end up into that mixture. If you had a recipe like this, I don't think you could just take oat flour, let's say, and substitute it out. It might not quite work out the same way. I don't know. Maybe it would. And that's something I think people have to experiment with, right?
Definitely a good chemistry experiment. And I think that's why changing the baking temperature and the baking time would also play a role in that.
Excellent information.
And
Awesome.
I believe that depending on what you're baking, you do need to figure out what a good substitute is. So for cake, I think those three that the Steam Sisters mentioned are really good substitutes. But if you're making bread or something else, you might have to use a different type of flour.
That's right. That's right. Through the magic of the internet, I have a final product of what our cake looks like when it comes out of the oven. So I think now's a good time before we move to the whipping cream to actually show you what that looks like. So I have it here. When you bring it out, that is what it looks like. Now, yes, this would not be anything you'd see on the Great Canadian Baking Show. It's a bit bland and boring for that type of event. But honestly, for what we're going to be doing here with your family or friends, this is an awesome cake. It is rustic and more simple looking, but I think sometimes that's some of the best thing. Now you can make it fancy by taking some powdered sugar, okay, and sprinkling that on top, make it snow there, and then when you cut yourself a nice piece of it, you'll get to see the fruits of your labor and how fluffy So when you cut it into it, you can see the air pockets that we've created. Okay, we have holes there, and that's really all from all that leavening that we did. And that's what you want to see. Now, if yours comes out sort of dense and flat, maybe there was some issues with the amount of air that you were beating into your eggs and sugar. But you know what? If you don't succeed, try again. It's not a big deal. So that's our cake. I'd recommend giving it a bit of a heat if you made this in advance, heating it up in the microwave just to soften it up a bit, because there is real butter in this particular version. And at room temperature, the butter can just it solidifies. And so to get it soft again, a couple of seconds in the microwave goes a long way. And next, we're going to talk about what you can put on top of this. So you could put a really awesome caramel sauce on this if you wanted to, although I think the best way is a scoop of ice cream. But that would really not be so scientific of us, because we couldn't get into ice cream making right now. But whipping cream is also a really awesome thing to put on this. And it's really just like ice cream. So we're going to talk whipping cream now, aren't we?
Well, yes, except we do have one question.
Yeah.
Does the material of the pan matter? Aluminum versus stainless steel versus non-stick?
Great question. So yes, it does. Yes and no. So the type of pan that you use will in fact change the way things cook. So if you had the darker the pan, the darker you're going to find your baked item gets. So this darker pan that I used, it's going to brown a bit more around the edges, which is okay for this particular cake. But you might find with some things that things look like they're almost burning before they're fully cooked. It's because the dark colored pan imparts some more heat to the baked good and cooks it a bit faster in the surface that it's touching. So the pans that I like to use a lot for baking cookies and stuff are aluminum pans. They're silver colored. They look like this one right here, actually. And so this, it bakes a bit different. And of course, another type of baking dish that you could have is glass. And you're going to find that that one is even lower on sort of the browning. You don't get as much browning on that. So it does make a difference, but it really doesn't. At the end of the day, whatever you have, you bake with, and it's fine.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I actually have found some baking hacks online. I feel like everyone has seen them. They're just like these fun, eye-catching videos, and they claim to be like super easy tips that you can sort of do every day. And you mentioned caramel, so I wanted to bring that up because I saw a baking hack for caramel, and basically they put condensed milk into a jar and microwave it for 5 minutes.
Yeah, so that would make a caramel of sorts. I think it's more properly called dulce de leche, and it's like a sweetened caramelized milk, and that would work, and it's absolutely delicious. So what you end up doing is you end up caramelizing the sugar that's already in that sweetened condensed milk, and then you also caramelize some of the or brown some of the proteins, and that's something we actually didn't talk about today was the Mayard reaction. And maybe someone else can tell us about that.
Oh, I could tell you about that. Yeah. I love the Maillard reaction. The Maillard reaction is all over the food industry. It's you could write a PhD on Maillard reaction, but it is a reaction between the protein and sugars, non-reducing sugars, if I'm not mistaken. And what it does is just create this nice brown color and these really nice flavor notes that are brown, scrumptious, delicious.
I love the description.
Yeah, and it's something you find everywhere, right? You can find it in your steak whenever you cook it and it caramelizes. That is a Maillard reaction. When you bake bread, that is a Maillard reaction. When anything where something has sugar and protein, you will see Maillard reaction, and it's a wonderful thing.
The first time we learned about the Maillard reaction was when we were baking bagels, and that was really fun. And we learned then that it was a reaction between non-enzymatic, right, under high heat between
that is correct.
The protein and the protein and the carbonyl group of the sugar, and it's not caramelization, right? That only happens between sugars.
That's right.
So it's a different kind of reaction.
Yeah, they're not the same. Although I thought they might have been really similar, maybe even the same, but they're not. They're distinct.
That's right. Very much so. Like when you take a chicken breast and put it on a hot skillet to cook it, it gets brown, but there's no sugar in there, right? It's the Maillard reaction. So it's very interesting stuff. But yes, that hack would result in some pretty darn tasty caramel-like liquid.
Right, but it's not caramel.
It's caramel is actually sugar that has been cooked over heat to actually cause it to darken. And then to that, you would add cream and maybe some butter, and that is caramel. Truly. But honestly, who's splitting hairs on that one? It's fine. It's good.
As long as it's yummy.
Yeah. Now, how are you guys doing with your baking? Can we move on to whipping cream, or you still need some time?
Just about to stick ours in the oven.
Okay.
But we'd love to see the whipping cream.
Okay, you know what? While you guys are getting your cakes in the oven, we'll talk whipping cream. So most people know what whipping cream is. It is heavy cream, which is different from any other type of cream product, okay? You can't use blend. You can't use coffee cream. It has to be heavy cream, which is roughly 35% milk fat. It's very important. And a bowl and something to beat it with, which could be a whisk or your hand mixer. And all you do is you go to town with it And all of a sudden you take this liquid and you get this lovely, unctuous, soft, fluffy whipped cream. But there's a lot of science behind how that happens. And so a couple of things I want to tell you to maximize your whipping cream efforts are a few things. Number one, make sure your whipping cream is super cold. Okay, you do not want to take whipping cream that's warm and try to whip it. Okay, it's not going to work in really giving you a lot of lift and volume in your whipping cream. But something else that's going to help you get a really nice, soft, fluffy whipped cream is making sure your bowl is chilled. And so if you are prepared, you can stick your mixing bowl in the freezer for a half an hour and let it get really cold, and then add your whipping cream to that and whip it in that, and you'll get a better whipped cream at the end of the day. So I'm using my mixing bowl here. I have my whipping cream here in the fridge. I'm using 1 cup. You know, quantities don't matter so much here, but I'm using 1 cup because we're also going to sweeten this, and we're going to sweeten it with icing sugar. Now, could you use normal granulated sugar? Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that. But what I like about using icing sugar is it also provides some stability to the whipping cream. So if this is a whipping cream that you're going to be making and having it sit around for maybe the day, not outside at room temperature, but in the fridge, having the icing sugar as your sweetener will provide a little bit more stability to the whipped cream, and it won't fall apart on you so quickly. Okay. Icing sugar is obviously sugar, but to it is also added cornstarch. And that cornstarch will actually provide the stability by absorbing some of the liquid that might start to seep out of the whipping cream and basically tying it up so it doesn't leak out.
Wow. There's a lot of science in whipping cream.
There is. Any questions on that?
I don't see any questions yet, but I'm using coconut milk because
Cool.
I can't have whipping cream. But it might go really well with whoever's using coconut oil for their cake. And I've just put this in the fridge for a day or so, and I'm spooning out the solid fat, and there's some liquid on the bottom that I'm going to just ignore for now. We'll see what we'll do with it later.
Let's see what happens. So
Yeah.
I'm going to take this to my mixer now. I did not add the sugar right away. I'm going to let this whip up until it just starts to thicken. So it's going to look like yogurt almost. And then I'm going to add the icing sugar. It really, if you added the icing sugar now, it would be fine. It would just take a bit longer to whip. Okay, so I would just wait. Now, if you were using normal sugar, I would do the exact same thing. I would just wait to add the sugar and add it bit by bit as it starts to thicken. So let me go back and whip this up, and I will come back to show you what it looks like before I add my sugar.
Okay, I'm also going to whip. So,
So
sorry, go ahead.
the sugar is important for the stability of the whipping cream, but in the same way, the temperature and the fat content are 2 other factors that are super important for the stability of the whipping cream. The higher the fat content, the better it is for the rigidity of that whipping cream, because you'll have more of those solid fat particles in there. And the lower the temperature, as Sachin was saying, in terms of keeping the bowl chilled and using that cold cream, will also help because you're having a higher viscosity of your cream, and it will just be a firmer thing. With a warmer temperature, you're just going to have the fat globules spread apart more and separate, and you'll just have a softer texture overall, which is not what we're looking for in this case.
But might be what happens with ours, because I took it out early and I just stuck it in the freezer real quick.
Oh yeah, I was like, oh no, I don't have a bowl, so I'll just use regular. Okay, so that's what yours looks like.
So here's my cream. It just slightly thickened, okay? It only took like a minute to do this. Now I'm gonna add my sugar to this. So it's a 1/4 cup icing sugar, okay? And then you can just keep on mixing, okay? Now, here's the thing. You can also add your cinnamon to this. Oops. If you're going to want to add cinnamon, it really is a nice flavor along with the gingerbread cake. You could add vanilla, 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla if you wanted to leave the cinnamon out. But you want to make sure you don't over whip. That is possible. You can take this too far and you actually cause the fat that you're actually creating a emulsion of the fat in the liquid there and causing it to get thick and fluffy, and push it too far over and have it separate out. And that actually takes you to the next stage, which is butter. And so we're not making butter today, or are we? I don't know. I'm going to show you what it looks like whipped properly. And then you know what? For fun, I'm going to take it further and make butter for you. So let's just whip this right now, and I'll be back in 2 minutes to show you what I have.
On the topic of whipping cream,
Oh, yeah.
I was just having a look at the ingredient listing of my Quebon whipping cream, and I do see ingredients that I recognize, like crystalline cellulose, carrageenan, and cellulose gum. And those are added in the cream to further stabilize the emulsion and thicken it as well.
That's awesome. Thank you. I feel like I'm learning so much about the industry as well, which is like slightly different from what we're used to, baking at home, where we're not necessarily aware of what's happening in the industry. I would just want to add about my coconut milk or coconut whipped cream that instead of, I think what whipping cream is air and water sort of foam mixture. Mine is more of an oil and water emulsion. So slightly different, but hopefully not too different.
Something that I'm just noticing between a professional kitchen and an amateur like ours, we don't have that many bowls, so we're still washing the one we used to make the batter.
Oh yeah, I had to like wipe one of them down.
So whipping cream is whipped. And I want to show you this. So this is called stiff peak whipped cream. So when I lift the beater out of, the whipping cream will stand up on a nice peak. Now, you can have different phases of whipped cream, and it can be soft peak and medium peak. And so when you want the whipping cream to stand straight up like that, that means it's really reached its maximum thickness, and you can stop right there. And it's great, and it's done, and leave it in the fridge until you're ready to use it. Now, if I were to keep on going here, it's going to just get a bit thicker, and then it's going to start getting real funny looking, and it's going to start to look really curdly and not so nice, and I keep on whipping. And if I keep on going, eventually what's going to happen is all the fat is going to fall out of liquid, and it's going to clump together in a ball of butter. And that's butter. So I could actually take that, I'd rinse it off, and I could eat it with my toast tomorrow morning. So you know what, just for fun, I'm going to show you what that looks like. I'm going to whip this so we have fresh butter. So give me just 2 or 3 minutes and I'll be back.
Okay. Meanwhile, you can think about, someone asked a question about alternatives to whipping cream as a topping for this cake. I know, Sachin, you mentioned it a little bit before, but I think he mentioned, I don't know if anyone else remembers, caramel would be really nice. Ice cream, I remember him saying.
Would I like to add to my gingerbread baked goods, or when I buy it, rather, because I've been making before.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this from now on, is adding crystallized ginger, which adds just that extra zing and difference in texture, which I really like. So I think we're pretty much ready to now start the whipping cream. So we're going to do that. So I don't think I was supposed to, but I took a quick peek at the cake. It looks really good.
I definitely got coconut on my laptop. As you're looking at your cake, someone has asked about pans. Should you rotate the pan halfway through the bake? And do you know of any concerns regarding aluminum leaching into food? I know we're all busy baking, so maybe something to think about as we are putting it together. I know mine still needs to be whipped a little bit more. This is making me realize that I would be really bad at a baking competition. I'm already sweating, and I know I have no skin in this game. I'm not competing for anything, but I'm already like slightly stressed.
You're taking me back. You're taking me back to the weekend when I was making a pie, and I was blown away at how much time it took me to peel 4 apples.
Yeah, I mean, Thanksgiving is one of those things where it's a whole day. It's a process, right?
Yeah. A definite process, but worth it in the end.
Always takes longer than you think.
It always does. Something always goes wrong.
And so worth it, which is what I'm feeling about this cake. So worth it.
Oh yes, it's gonna be so. I'm so excited. I'm so excited, and I'm excited to see everyone else's pictures. Like, again, please feel free to share what your process is like. I think I'm going to take a picture of how messy I've made my kitchen and share that, as well as what I end up with. So feel free. All of those who are baking along with us, if you're viewing, share your photos of your kitchen, of your final product. We would love to see it, and definitely tag us. I'm sure Sachin would love to see it. Steam Sisters as well. They're also on Instagram.
Okay, I have a quick question while everybody's doing their little tasks there is, when you bake a cake or when you eat a cake, do you prefer a square cake, a circle cake, or some other? Because for me, I think square. I like the corner piece.
The quarter piece is nice to have that as an option for sure.
I like the circle just because when you cut it, it leaves a nice symmetrical shape. That's just my little OCD.
For the aesthetics of it.
Yeah, simply.
Also, whatever shape you give me, it's cake, and I'm gonna eat it.
That's for sure.
So I will say that coconut milk does take a little bit to cream and to whip up. It's, unless I've over whipped it, which is probably also likely.
I'm afraid my whipped cream is a little soft, but I don't want to risk making butter.
Yeah, Sam, like, is it okay if it's just watery? It's the same, right?
Yeah.
How's it going on your end, Sachin?
Hey everybody, sorry about ignoring you. I'm almost there. It does take a bit of time, probably another 2 minutes, but I thought I'd check in to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, so we had a question about rotating the pan halfway through baking, and any concern about aluminum leaching into food. Two-parter.
Okay, a couple of questions. So I'll talk about the pan rotation first. So ovens are notorious for having hot spots in them, and it's all about convection of hot air. And sometimes things move around very well in ovens, and other times they don't. So generally speaking, I would rotate halfway through baking. But because this pan is pretty small, and hopefully you've placed it in the center of your oven on the center rack, you're likely going to be okay, and you don't have to rotate. When you have big baking sheets of cookies where they're going right to the edge of the oven to the front, that's where you start to get some funny heat levels. And so I'll always rotate my baked goods on a larger sheet when I'm using that. But for this small 8x8, 9x9 cake, you're going to be fine. Don't worry about opening the oven. You might cause more harm than good at that point. So, and in terms of aluminum leaching into your food, you know, I got to say, I've never heard of that one, and maybe one of the other individuals on this call can help me out with that, but I've never heard of stuff leaching in. I mean, technically speaking, sure, but I don't think it's a major concern.
Yeah,
Fred, do you have?
I've never heard of that either in the normal cookware that we use. And if this can reassure a few people, then the Canadian, well, CFIA, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, or the other regulatory bodies like the Food and Drugs Administration would never allow hazardous material to be sold on the market for the purposes advertised. If it is baking in this instance, then the risks are minimal. The risks are really minimal.
That's really reassuring to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. Because those guys, they're tough when it comes to regulations. Whenever somebody gets in trouble in the food industry, it's really hard to get them off their tail.
Right.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. That's what we need, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Fred,
As
you
it should
had,
be.
sorry,
Sorry.
go ahead. No, I was going
No,
to ask another
Go ahead.
question.
Yes.
We had talked before, off camera before, about the sweetness scale. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Oh, absolutely. So, what the sweetness scale is, it's a sort of way of ranking what sugars taste like relative to one another, and our base reference is table sugar or white sugar, which is sucrose. That's a combination of glucose and fructose, which are two monomers that make up sugar that we have in general. So what sugar is really is just a long chain of glucose and fructose. So sucrose, if we consider that a 1 in terms of sweetness, glucose is 0.75, if I'm not mistaken, or 0.85 in terms of sweetness, and fructose is a 1.5 to 1.75, generally speaking. So what's interesting is that when they're combined together, they produce that reference flavor, but when they're separated, fructose is actually sweeter than its counterpart, glucose. And what's interesting about that is we've all heard of high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah.
And the way that's made is we take syrup and we enzymatically modify it or chemically modify it so that the fructose content increases, which makes it sweeter. So as in the use of high intensity sweeteners, you have to use a lot less fructose than you'd have to use glucose. So you save on cost of material, which is what explains the popularity of high fructose corn syrup.
Right. That's really good to know. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem. And really, on a matter that's related, we also have other sweeteners like stevia that we mentioned earlier on, which are high intensity sweeteners, or sucralose that are sometimes 200 times sweeter than sucrose. And those are the kind of substances that you only need a really small pinch of it when they're in their pure state in order to sweeten your things. But whatever's available to the general market is often diluted in cornstarch so that it's more intuitive for the customers, for consumers, to replace sugar with it. It sort of feels like a 1-to-1, but really you're getting maybe 0.003% of the actual sweetener, and the rest is starch.
That's so precise. Thank you.
Yes.
So where are you at now, Fred, with your baking?
I finished whipping my cream, and my cake is in the oven, so I'm just waiting.
Yeah.
I'm taking little bites of my cream while I'm waiting.
Yeah, I just do too.
Fred, you're a little bit ahead of us. We've got our cake in the oven and it's making the kitchen smell amazing. But we're still working on the cream. We got it in a little bit late because we were worried about the temperature.
Yeah.
And I took it out a little too early, so I stuck it in. Took it out, and now we've got all the ingredients in.
Just gonna say my
bowl
bowl is full of, like, it's all over. Very messy. Hello.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm back. It took a little bit longer because of the low amount of cream that I had, but listen, it's worth it because now when I show you this,
oh,
wow,
I have butter and buttermilk. So that stuff right there is actually just buttermilk.
Okay.
And so it's pretty cool. So it all came together and it collected on the end of my whisk. And I don't know if you can see with the camera, but it's actually yellow in color. All the milk fat, it came out. And so what I would do now with this is I would drain off, I mean, the buttermilk. I suppose I should probably save and use that for something like pancakes. And I will rinse this underwater just to get some of that buttermilk out. And then it is fresh natural butter.
Amazing.
And
Wow.
it's pretty cool. So don't despair if you whipped your cream too much. Even if it were sweetened and you whipped it to the point of butter, it's okay. It'll be really good. It'll just be slightly sweeter. But I don't have a problem with that. And if you had cinnamon in there and you whipped it to the point of butter, I'm okay. It'll be awesome. Okay.
Cinnamon butter.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
So anyways, I wanted to show you guys that because some people, I mean, you have to really push it far to get it to go. But if you just walked away from it and had a larger volume of liquid, it would beat very quickly into butter. But again, there's nothing wrong with that because now I have fresh butter. It's awesome.
That is awesome. This is what my whipped cream looks like. I don't know if that's
Let's take a look.
about right.
Yeah, you know what? That looks really good. How does it taste, Celia?
It definitely tastes like coconut.
It does.
Yeah, but it's not like super strong. I sometimes like the coconut. I sometimes don't. This is okay. I can do this.
You know, that's, I was watching a show, I forget which one, but there's actually egg white substitutes as well for meringue, and it's called aquafaba. And what it actually is the liquid from chickpeas. So if you have a can of chickpeas and you drain all the liquid out and you were to actually beat that, it becomes like meringue, like an egg white meringue. So
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting how many alternatives people are able to come up with because of it. So it's awesome. We do have a question about buttermilk. How is that made in this, like in the store-made version? Is it really a butter byproduct, or
Yes.
is it different?
It absolutely is. It is the product of making butter. So that whey that you have there at the bottom, that is in fact how it's made in a store. Well, we can get in there. Yeah, that liquid, that white liquid, that is buttermilk, and it will, you can use this just like you would buttermilk, and in factories where they make it, it is really the byproduct of making butter, and what's left over, thankfully, we use, and very successfully so, in baked goods and cooking. So yeah.
Amazing.
When I've been trying to make buttermilk, when we don't have any, to do some baked goods, I think we found quick recipes like a baking hack where what you do is you take some milk, add a little bit of lemon juice,
Yes.
vinegar, let it sit for about 10 minutes, and voila, buttermilk. Thank the chemistry, you got your buttermilk.
That's right. And so really all you do is it's 1 cup of milk to 1 tablespoon of vinegar or lemon juice, and let it sit like what you just said. And then it curdles, it gets acidic. And what you're really doing is bringing the acid to the game, because buttermilk is acidic. And by adding the vinegar or lemon juice, you've just substituted out that acidity. And it works actually really well. It works really well. You know, there's a slight difference in the fluffiness that you get, but it's a great thing in a pinch. I've used it many times.
I've done something similar with like oat milk in making pancakes, and it seems to make quite fluffy pancakes. I don't know how to compare to buttermilk pancakes, but I do quite enjoy them.
Yeah. They're I'm sure they'll be awesome. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's anything else that we need to add and to finish up our product. But I do want to ask you, you appeared on the Great Canadian Baking Show. Of course, we have to ask you a little bit about that. How was the experience meeting Dan Levy? Now he's a huge icon, a huge Canadian icon now.
It was an amazing experience. Well, I'll talk about the show first. It was so much fun. I don't think I can explain really how much fun I had. It was so different from my regular life, which is very, boring in some levels, because I'm a dentist and it's dentistry things and it's very sciencey and it's very medical, and you have to live in a very small box. And then when you get to go to something like the Great Canadian Baking Show, and I can be so creative, and the challenges that they gave me really stretched and pushed myself to do things that I would never have done in my own kitchen. I just would never try things. And so because of that, I think it made me 10,000 times a better baker because of that experience. And so that was really cool. I wouldn't trade it for the world. And certainly meeting Dan Levy and Julia Chan and Bruno and Rochelle, they were awesome. It was so much fun to meet these people. We actually did get to interact with them. You know, when Dan would come around or Julia would come around, they would in fact have conversations with you, and they would laugh with you, and they would make jokes with you, and it was really fun. They were excellent at making you feel like you were friends with them, which is really great.
That's awesome. Yeah, amazing. And how has your baking sort of progressed since the show? Like, I know that you've been pretty active on Instagram with all these really cool creations.
Yeah. I get, again, you know, because of that, I'm really pushing myself to try new things. And I think what early or novice bakers tend to forget is that we all started there at one point, and we all had our major blunders. And I still have them. I'll still make something and it turned out not great. And I'll have to just throw it or try to figure out some way to salvage it. But listen, the mistakes are the best part, because that's where you learn. And so my baking has just become a bit more confident, I would say, and I'm able to talk a bit more fluently about it, like we did tonight. It's just from practice makes perfect. It's just the way it goes. And baking is one of those things you have to practice at it to get better.
Yeah, and I love. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just curious, speaking of mistakes, what's the most common mistake that you see or hear about in other bakers?
Wow, that's a really good question. The most common mistake I'm going to say when it comes to baking is not measuring your ingredients before you begin. So you want to have something called your mise en place, and that's making sure everything is laid out and measured before you actually start baking. And of course, always read the recipe through a couple times before you start. Almost so you know what to do without having to refer to it. Because that's really where a lot of mistakes are made, that you add too much or too little of something, or you forgot if you added something. And listen, that still happens to me, where I'll be like, oh my gosh, did I add the salt? I don't remember if I did. And you know, it's really hard to sort of backtrack and fix that. So that's, from what I've seen, a very common mistake. And second to that is really ensuring that you have your what needs to be at room temperature is at room temperature, what needs to be chilled is chilled, because you can't sort of not follow those rules. Things won't turn out very well. So if I take cold butter tonight and just started to whip it with sugar, it would just be a mess. It wouldn't work out. So those little things that people think, oh, it won't matter if I don't do that, it'll be fine. Unfortunately, it's not.
Those are really great tips. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely measure twice, bake one.
Yeah, no, baking is for exacting individuals. If you don't like to measure things and follow a recipe, I don't know if baking is for you. And you know, I speak to people who are wonderful cooks, and they hate baking because they don't like the lack of freedom. You know, and for me, it really itches that analytical chemistry side of mine that is all about precise measurement and making sure everything is just right. I love cooking too, but baking really, it speaks to me.
That I just had memories of analytical chemistry.
Yeah.
Flooding back at you.
Yeah, we're going to say nightmare, right, everybody? Nightmare.
Oh, yeah, it was definitely the worst that the chemistry students had to suffer through. But I think that's a really good tip, because I always thought, you know, when they had all those bowls and cups set up on baking shows, that it was just sort of, you know, produced, that it was part of the show, but actually it's really good part of baking in general.
It really is. It's really good to have everything measured out. I still do it, and I've been baking a while. I still do it to make sure. Absolutely, it's worth the extra couple of minutes.
Great. And I would like. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, we just chiming in to say we learned the temperature thing the hard way today with a that one anymore.
Oh yeah, it's good to know that about these temperature things. I just wanted to let people know. You know, if you have any more questions or comments, especially for Sachin or any of our other guests, please, this is the time to send them in. We have another question. Do we let the cake cool before removing it from the pan?
Good question. God, these are some great questions. Yeah, you want to let it sit in the pan for about 10 minutes. And then you can just run a knife or a spatula or something along the sides that don't have any of the parchment paper, just to loosen it up, and then either turn it or lift it out, depending on how much parchment overhang you had. But then you want to let it cool. But you know what? This particular cake is not the type of cake you have to let cool down to room temperature. Like I said, it is best a bit warm. So I would give it maybe 20 to 30 minutes total, and then eat it. Like, dig in. Get a scoop of ice cream, scoop of whipped cream, get it on there. It's absolutely delicious when it's warm.
Amazing.
And
Thank
it reminds me of the fall, the spices in there. It's really what fall and this time of year is all about.
Awesome. Fred, Steam Sisters, do you guys have anything to add before we sort of start to wrap up? Unless, Sachin, I don't think there are any steps left, are there?
No, I think that's it. Anything else? Oh, I should mention how to store this. So you can keep it at room temperature for in an airtight container, wrapped 3 to 5 days, and then things start to go funny. And I'm sure the Steam Sisters will tell us all about mold and foliage very well, right? But you want to be very careful with that. But if you keep it in the fridge, it'll likely last up to a week and maybe even a bit longer, but it will start to dry out a bit. If you don't think you're going to eat this right away, or you're going to just want a piece now and save the rest, you can actually freeze it very well. Cakes freeze awesomely. They can freeze, some people say, up to a year. I don't think I'd want to push that. It probably would be a bit freezer burnt, but I think you could probably easily get 3 months out of this safely. You can keep it in the freezer, uncut if you want, or you can cut it into pieces, well wrapped in something that's very airtight. Put it in the freezer and take out your piece when you need it. Thaw it in the microwave, let it come to room temperature. It'll work perfectly.
Amazing.
Beautiful.
That's really good to know. I don't think it will last for 3 months.
You're right. The Steam Sisters are going to eat it all tonight. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
One other quick question that comes to mind, because we were leaning heavily on the stand mixer today, but what is your most reliable tool in the kitchen?
Ooh, what is my most reliable tool? I got to say it's my hand mixer. Like, I don't know what I would do without this mixer behind me. If it dies one day, I will go into a fit of despair, and I don't know what I'm going to do, but get another one, because it's irreplaceable. It's just, it is my one tool that I don't think I could do without. That and a spatula. That is really interesting, because we were chatting with one of Canada's first master chefs recently, and he said a spatula was his go-to tool too. Oh, well, there you go. I mean, this is the mark of a really good baker or chef. There you go.
Very versatile. Do you guys have any? Sorry. I was going to ask if there was anything else you guys wanted to add, or if you have any other questions. We do have a few comment questions as well, or audience questions, but.
Oh, we just wanted to say that this has been amazing fun, and thank you so much for having us. And it's been fantastic learning from Sachin as well.
Oh, yeah. I'm so happy we could do this together. And I certainly learned stuff from all of you as well. It was a great experience for me.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
An experiment where you get to eat the product.
Right?
Yeah. Mine is going to be ready in 4 minutes, I think.
So, I know. I didn't think we would actually get to see the final product, but at this point, we might be able to.
I think we might be able to. So, I mean, there are some questions that I can take, and I'll certainly, I will take them and check on my cake as I talk. But yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a question of, can you cook this in small individual tins?
Ooh, good. Yeah, like a muffin tin. You most certainly could. You want to change a couple things, and that's notably your cooking time. Okay, because they're individual smaller compartments, you're going to cook in a significantly lower amount of time. And if you're using a muffin tin with a cupcake liner or a muffin liner, fill it about halfway to 2/3, and you're likely going to need to bake it for 25 to 35 minutes at most. I would start actually at 20 and check it. But it'll take a couple more minutes. But yeah, it'll cook much faster.
That's a really good tip for if you ever want to just like change the way that you're serving it for sure.
Absolutely, that's a great idea, and you can get some really neat little cute muffin tins that maybe look like little loaves or little other shapes. It's really neat idea for sure.
And we also have a question about once we put the whipped cream on the cake, if you left the cake at room temperature, would the whipped cream disintegrate?
Oh, well, I'm glad you brought that up. The whipped cream is not meant to spread over the whole thing.
Oh,
It's meant to dollop on your piece. So you could have some with or some without. You can have ice cream, you can have caramel sauce, whatever. But no, don't cover whipped cream over the whole thing. Okay? No, definitely do not want to leave that out of room temperature.
I was maybe going to do that, so that's excellent that we brought that up.
I'm so happy we talked about that.
Yes.
I took it for granted that it was a side and not a topping.
and that was partly my fault as well. I sort of jumped in with the questions before you were able to wrap up with that. So
it was a serendipitous mistake, maybe, that we solved the problem before it happened. So it's good.
Thankfully, yes. We also had someone ask how has the pandemic made you bake more, or has the pandemic made you bake more? Sorry, I read that question wrong.
That is actually, it has, well, okay, so let's go back. It's a journey, because first, when the pandemic first started here in Nova Scotia, it was like March, and things shut down, and we were home, and I mean, we like eating, and so I would bake a bit, but then we started running out of stuff, and then the baking just stopped. Because I couldn't find flour, couldn't find yeast. It was really weird, and I'd used up my stores, and then we could get it again, and then I started baking lots. And then I got sort of sick of baking because we couldn't only eat so much. My wife was like, no more. We cannot eat any more of this stuff. So then people started coming out of the woodwork looking for cakes. And I have never been busier baking cakes for other people. So it's gotten very busy since the pandemic has started. And I don't know if it's because of the pandemic or what, but I'll take it.
What's been your favorite cake to make recently?
Oh, that's a really great question. One of my favorites that unfortunately I didn't even get to try, it's on my Instagram. It's an apple crumble cake. And it looks like apple crisp, but in cake format. So it was a spiced cake with an apple pie filling and a crumbly top. Hang on, I'm going to get my... So yeah, that was one. I didn't even get to try it. It was my baby that went away, and yeah.
That sounds delicious. I mean, it's like pie and cake in one.
Exactly. All right. So let's see what this looks like. So I have a cake tester. It's like my reusable skewer. I'm going to stick it right in the middle here and pull out, and there's nothing stuck. And when I push on the cake, you can see it bounces back. Okay, so it's not sinking in. My fingerprint is not leaving a mark behind. And you see some cracks on top there. That's a sign that things really rose, and we have some nice lift here. Now again, I want to draw your attention here on the sides. You might notice things are a bit dark, and that has to do with the fact that I haven't overcooked this. The pan is just going to impart a darkness there. It's nothing to worry about. It's not even going to taste burnt. It's just going to be darker. So that is the cake.
Amazing.
And so I'll let it cool in here 10 minutes, and then I can lift it out and put it on a cooling rack and let it cool for another maybe 10 or 15 minutes before I dig in.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm glad we were able to see the final product. Thank you, Sachin. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Steam Sisters, for joining us. We hope everyone that's been watching, I hope you guys enjoyed tonight's presentation and demonstration. We hope to see your progress, creations, and messy cushions, all of that. Oops, and I have my timer going off. All of that. We'd love to see that on social media. You can tag RCI Science in your photos on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. And please, please, please share your feedback with us. We would love to know how you enjoyed or maybe didn't enjoy the show with us, and let us know what you'd like to see from us in the future. We should have the link coming up on the screen and in the chat box. Next Sunday, October 25th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We're exploring the science of scary in time for Halloween. So join us for a look at why bats get a bad rep, how you can survive a zombie apocalypse, very important, and understand why there's nothing to fear but fear itself. Details about all of our upcoming events can be found on our website at rciscience.ca/what's-on. And there should also be a link on the screen and in the chat. So thank you so much, all of you who are watching. Thank you, all of our bakers, and Sachin especially for leading us in this. Thank you so much. Have a good night, and I hope it's delicious.
Take care. Enjoy, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Have a good evening.